Welcome back to Purgatorio, the 14th century poem written by Dante Alighieri. In the last episode, our poets walked among the prideful, those suffering to purge their souls with harsh lessons of humility. In this episode, Dante and Virgil will tackle the second terrace of Purgatory, the terrace of the Envious. The poets step out from the stairs onto another clearing. Just as the last terrace, this one bends out from them to a curve in both directions. Dante says that the curve is noticeably sharper than before. The second terrace, like the second circle of the Inferno, is smaller than the first. Our poets look upon a landscape of drab grey rocks, lacking the grandeur of the Arachnean art that greets those on the Terrace of Pride. The area appears to be empty, with no souls to be seen. Virgil concludes that if the pair of them stick around and wait, it is unlikely that anyone will show up for a long time. Too long, perhaps. Dante's mentor looks up to the sun as a guiding light, pivots his body to turn right, and then moves to follow the sun's beams.
O sweet light, conduct us upon the new way. You give warmth to the world and shine upon it. If no reason disposes us to the contrary, we ought to always be led by your beams.
The pair walk speedily along the path of the sun, marching purposefully for around a mile. As they progress, Dante begins to hear words coming from characters unseen, flying past him through the air. The first of them utters the phrase, "Vinum non abent," or, "they have no wine." This is a direct reenactment of the book of John, where Mary tells Jesus that the guests of a wedding in Cana were without wine. The disembodied voice echoes the line repeatedly, until it is somehow behind our poets and rolling off into the distance. Just before the sound can't be heard, another voice flies past Dante's ears. The man's words yell out that he is Orestes. This is a reference to the historical story of Pylades and Orestes, two great friends who proclaimed that they were the same man to save one another from death. Dante recognizes both of these references as examples of love, specifically examples of love towards another. He speaks to Virgil, asking what these voices are and where they come from. Before Virgil can answer though, he is interrupted by yet another invisible character.
But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you.
This one is a reference to the book of Matthew, echoing Jesus' own words. Virgil responds to Dante's question.
This circle punishes the sin of envy, and for that reason the whips are made of love. Though I think you will hear the bridle's contrasting lessons, that is my guess, before you arrive at the pass of pardon.
Virgil tells Dante to look carefully around himself, especially to the mountain's rock face on the inner bend of the terrace. There Dante will see many souls, seated and lining the way.
Then I opened my eyes and saw shades with cloaks the same color as the rock.
A soul cries out. He implores Mary, Michael, Peter, and all the saints to pray for those among him. The second terrace is dedicated to the envious, those without love. The punishment of the envious is to be sat down in vile and ragged sackcloth, propped up by neighbouring penitents and the cliff at their backs. But worst of all are their eyes, sewn shut with iron wire, to punish their offence of envying all the good they saw. Beneath their sealed eyes they weep, tears streaming through the iron wire seams onto their cheeks. The envious appear like blind beggars, their heads leaning and relying on each other for support. Unlike Virgil, the penitents are not able to look upon the guiding light of the sun. They can't even glimmer at the hope of the denied light of paradise. Dante writes that even the most hardened, strong, and unemotional man would not be able to resist the feelings of compassion here. He discovers it hard to hold in his tears of grief. This terrace is the second example of Dante's thematic template of Purgatory, a general flow that the terraces follow. The template goes like this. First, we witness examples of the virtue used to cleanse the offence of the terrace, or as Virgil calls this, the whip. On the first terrace, the whip was the marble sculptures of humility. On this terrace, as we just saw, the whip were the floating voices of love. It's noticeable that the first virtue example on each terrace is always a reference to Mary. After the whip, we then see examples of the punishment being enacted on resident souls. We discover for what reason these souls are being punished so harshly. After the souls, we witness examples of the offence itself, or as Virgil calls this, the bridle. In the first terrace, the bridle was the marble art etched into the floor, displaying ancient examples of pride. Finally, each terrace ends with an angel ushering the poets onwards to easier climbs, followed by a recitation of one of Jesus' Beatitudes. Dante is standing between Virgil and the souls, Virgil hugging the outer edge of the terrace near the ledge. Our living poet is quite annoyed at the fact that he was passing through so many hidden souls, seeing them, but not being seen in return. It feels to him to be quite a rude thing to do. He turns to look at his mentor with questioning silence, seeking permission to talk to the penitents. Virgil replies to Dante's expressions.
Speak, but be short and to the point.
Our poet steps towards a group of seated souls. He calls out to them, naming them as those whose only desire is to seek exalted light. Dante asks the souls to take a moment to relieve their burdens and remember their lives, seeking any of them who might be Italian.
Oh, my brother, each of us is a citizen of one true city. You mean to search for one who merely lived in Italy as a pilgrim.
The woman's voice comes a little further afield than Dante expects. He walks towards it to try to converse with the penitent a little easier. She who spoke sticks out plainly from the group, with a posture of expectancy. Her head is lifted up and her chin is pointed outwards. Dante still confirms with her that she was the one who spoke, asking then to make herself and her land of origin known.
I was Sienese, and with others here I cleansed my wicked life. My name was Sapia, and despite my namesake, I was not wise. I found joy in the losses of others rather than my own good fortunes.
Sapia Salvani was a noblewoman from Siena. She was the aunt of Provenzano Salvani, a penitent that Dante recently saw suffering on the Terrace of Pride. Sapia explains that towards the end of her life, her fellow Sienese citizens left to fight the Florentines. She prayed to God that her own people would lose, and then experienced immense gladness when the prayer came true. Feeling an almost unstoppable happiness at the suffering of her people, she proclaimed to God that she was no longer afraid of him. Despite all of this, she sought peace with God at the end, and repented on her deathbed.
What I owed in time on the silent shore would still not be reduced had it not been for Pierre, the comb-maker, who remembered me in his holy prayers. He elevated me with his charity.
It's only at this point that Sapia questions who Dante is, stating that she has realized he is alive. She asks him what he is doing here, full of sight, and audibly breathing as he speaks.
My eyes will yet be taken from me in this place, though only for a little while, for they have not offended greatly through envy.
Dante says to Sapia that it is the punishments on the previous terrace that torment him, recognizing his own offences with the sin of pride.
Who then has brought you up among us here if you only expect to go back?
Our poet directs the shade's attention to Virgil, silent and standing watch. He then asks Sapia if she wishes for him to do anything for her when he returns to the living world. She's fairly surprised by the offer, but asks our poet to sometimes pray for her, and if one day he ever steps foot in Tuscany, that he inform her family that she is well. Sapia ends her conversation with our poet, stating that at her homeland, Dante will likely find vain people with a great hope in the port of Telamone, land that they had just recently purchased with a prospect of waterborne trade. The penitent says that it will be as much of a failure as the search for the River Diana, a hearsay river of pure water said to reside below the city. Unlike the search for Diana though, the port of Telamone will cost those investing in it even more money. two penitents over to Dante's right are speaking to one another.
Who is that man that travels around our mountain before death has given him the wings to fly? He who opens and closes his eyes willfully.
I don't know, but he's not alone. You should question him as you are nearer. Treat him kindly so that he will speak to us.
The soul calls out to Dante, recognizing that he is alive. He asks for Dante to be charitable, to identify himself and his homeland. The penitent says that he and his companion are in awe of Dante and his grace to wander the land of the dead. Dante sees that the pair of them are leaning upwards, like Sapia had just been. The penitents are named Rinieri da Carboli and Guido del Duca. Guido was from a wealthy Ghibelline family in Ravenna and served as a judge. Rinieri was from a wealthy Guelph family in Friuli, Romagna. He was a chief magistrate in multiple cities before being expelled from his homeland. In reply to these seated souls, our poet is a little cryptic when identifying himself, obscuring that he is from Florence. He talks of a river that is over 100 miles in length, a river through Tuscany that springs from Mount Falterona.
From a place on that river I bring myself. To tell you who I am would bring no purpose, as my name is not yet greatly spoken of.
Guido and Rinieri reply to Dante, trying to unpack his riddle.
If my mind manages to grasp the sense of what you just said, did you mean the Anna River?
Why did he hide the name of that river, as people do when speaking of something horrible?
Guido states that Dante was right to hide the Arno name. He begins a long tirade about the path of the Arno River, beginning at the water's start in the Apennines to the dissipating mist of the sea. Along the path of the Arno River, all virtue is avoided, as if it is a snake. Perhaps it is the river's nature, he ponders, or perhaps it is just man's bad habits. The human nature of those in the Arno's path has changed so greatly that they may as well now be beasts. These fallen peoples are changed, as if transformed and dominated by the Greek enchantress Circe. Guido sees each city along the Arno as the home of savage creatures, falling into lower and lower bestial states as the river falls onwards to the sea. First are the people of Casentino, described as filthy pigs more suited to feeding on acorns than human food. Next are the lands and the people of Arezzo, who Guido compares to mongrel dogs that snarl and present themselves as stronger than they actually are. The dogs turn to wolves at greedy Florence, the city lying close to the accursed and unfortunate ditch that is the Arno. Finally at Pisa, the wolves turn to foxes, full of tricks and masters of deceit. The metaphor of things falling, as an idea of devolution into something lesser, would have been pretty striking during Dante's time. Catholics believed they had a fixed place of being within the hierarchy of creation, that humanity's place was above beasts and below angels and God. The idea of becoming a beast was the ultimate expression of a man truly falling to the bottom, losing what it is that makes him a person. This particular scene and how it relates to humans descending from their natural place can be compared with Dante's description of the Old Man of Crete, the statue which cries falling tears that flow downwards to create the unnatural rivers of hell. Perhaps coincidentally, both the extended talk about the Old Man of Crete and the Arno River happen at similar points in Inferno and Purgatorio. After his description of the Arno, Guido gives Dante a prophecy which he says will surprise our poet, but also save him from unexpected future pain, if only Dante remembers fully what is about to be said. Guido tells Dante that if he one day returns to Florence, then he will find Rinieri's nephew, Fuccieri, as the hunter of the wolves on Arno's shore. Guido is speaking of the upcoming persecution of the White Guelphs of Florence, Dante's faction. By the time of Dante writing this, these events had already come to pass. The penitent continues that Fuccieri will fill these wolves with dread, sell their flesh whilst they are still alive, and then kill them like beasts. By depriving so many of life, Fuccieri will lose his honour and his worth. He will then leave Florence splattered with blood and gore. Florence, described in this instance as the rueful wood, will be so destroyed by Fuccieri that Guido states it will be a millennia before the city again becomes what it was. Rinieri, the penitent sat beside Guido, is turned to face him. He is listening closely to Guido's words about his wretched nephew. As the prophecy is spoken, Rinieri is visibly saddened, and now overwhelmingly troubled.
What the other said and how the other looked made me desire to know their names, so I half entreated them to tell me.
Guido asks if the poet is seeking from him what Dante would not provide himself, an identity. Remember that Dante still hasn't given these souls so much as a name. Guido remarks that as the man before him is so apparently filled with grace, he will not deprive him of what he seeks. He finally gives Dante his name and talks about his envy.
My blood was so set on fire by envy that if I had seen a man with cause to be glad, you would have seen my face discolored. O human race, why do you set your hearts on benefits that cannot be shared?
Guido identifies the man beside him as Rinieri, the noble head of a great house. He notes that none of Rinieri's descendants have yet inherited the man's better qualities and virtues. So begins another speech from this penitent, this time regarding the inadequacies of great families in his home region of Romagna and how they compare to ancient families. His speech is reminiscent of Sordello and Conrad's words in the Valley of Rulers, which suggested that nobility is not always inherited. Guido begins that it is not just Rinieri's family that has, as he says, divested from moral virtue. He describes Romagna as a boundary filled with poisonous brushwood. The penitent asks where all the virtuous ancient Romagnols have gone, naming Lizio de Valdobona, Arrigo Monardi, Pier Traversero, and Guido di Carigna. The Romagnols now, he continues, have become bastardized. In Bologna, you will no longer find a man like Fabio dei Lambertazzi. In Faenza, you will not see such the likes as Bernardino di Fosco, a man of low origin with noble talents.
Do not wonder if I weep, you Tuscan, when I remember Guido de Prata and Ugolino Dazio, those who lived among us.
Guido notes of Federico Cignoso and his troop, the houses of Traversero and Anastagi, lying ruined without heirs. The ancient knights and ladies, once with a heroic ideal tempered with courtesy and love, now fallen to evil ways. The shade speaks of the city of Bretonoro, that it should disappear as it is now populated with hateful people instead of its former noble families. The castle of Bagnacaval would do well to have no sons, and he wishes ill on the houses of Castrocaro and Cogno for daring to do so. The house of Pagani, Guido continues, will mostly recover once their infamous child, Machinado, or the demon, finally succumbs, though they will likely be stained forever. Finally, of Ugolino de Fantolin, Guido says there is no need to fear the degeneration of his name, likely because Ugolino is very old, and unlikely to produce an heir that would taint it.
Go your way, Tuscan, for now I would rather weep than talk. Our conversation has put my mind under such constraint.
With those words, Dante and Virgil turn and leave the two penitents behind.
We knew that those dear souls heard us go. They said nothing, so we could be confident of the way.
Some time passes. The pair have walked a little distance away from the souls, when suddenly a voice strikes at their ears. Dante compares it to a crack of lightning splitting the air.
Everyone that finds me shall kill me.
These words repeat those of Cain to God after being cast out, disowned for killing his brother Abel due to envy. In the biblical tale, it is not long after this that Cain receives his infamous mark, which prevents others from murdering him. The voice slowly reverberates away, and just as Dante feels things returning to normal, another heavy blow strikes at his ears. It makes our poet step closer to Virgil.
I am Aglaurus, who became a stone.
Aglaurus was the daughter of an Athenian ruler. She dared to cross Minerva. Mercury fell in love with her sister Circe, and Minerva used this to seek revenge. She cast upon Aglaurus a great jealousy of Mercury's affections. When Mercury came to visit Circe, Aglaurus prevented his entrance, and he reacted by turning the envious woman to stone. The harsh echoing of the terrace's bridle finally falls down to a calm silence once more.
That was the hard curb which ought to keep any man within his limits. But you ignore it, taking the bait of the adversary who then draws you to him instead. The heavens call to you and revolve around you, displaying to you their eternal beauties, yet your eye looks only to the ground. It is for this you are punished by God.
There appeared now to be left as much of the sun's course toward evening as between the 3rd hour and the beginning of the day. It was now vespers there, and midnight in Italy.
The light of the sun is directly in front of our poets now. They have encircled the terrace, as the sun has made its usual path across the sky. Dante notes that he and Virgil are now walking westwards. A bright, dazzling light starts to strike onto Dante's face, and he raises his hand to shield his eyes from what he believes is the sun. As he walks, he begins to realise that the light is coming from beneath him, not above, like a reflection in a mirror or a pool of water. He looks upwards to examine the same angle as the reflected light, and his eyes are quickly thrown away from its brightness. Dante asks Virgil what the blinding light is.
Do not be astonished if the servants of heaven still dazzle you. It is a messenger who invites us to ascend. Soon you will find things of this kind are not a burden, but will give you delight.
Our poets step closer to the angel of mercy. It speaks to them with a pleasant and gladdened tone.
Now come in here, by a stairway, much less steep than the others.
The poets begin to climb up the staircase when Beati Misericors, or Blessed are the Merciful, starts to triumphantly be sung behind them. Dante feels he would benefit from Virgil's wisdom. He asks what Guido meant when he said that humans always set their sights on benefits that cannot be shared. Virgil answers that Guido understands the negatives of his offence, so his disappointment in others for committing that offence shouldn't be so surprising.
For insofar as your desires are fixed on things which are diminished by being shared, envy will pump sighs out of your lungs.
The mentor continues that those that look for the love of the divine will no longer have fear of envy. In heaven, the object of good is treated as ours rather than mine. The more that good is shared, the more that all are blessed with love. Virgil's explanation further confuses Dante.
How can it be that good divided up among many can make those who possess it richer than if only divided amongst a few?
Virgil explains that Dante is still fixing his mind on the matter as if it is an earthly object, something that diminishes when shared. The idea is that envy is only a living world concern, where sharing something on earth divides it, enforcing the sin of envious desire. Spiritual good multiplies as more share it. Virgil says that eternal love from God pours from the soul like light on a surface, and this is in proportion to the amount of love and charity that a person bears.
The more people up there turn to each other, the more there are to love, and the more that love is reflected from one to another, as with mirrors.
The mentor continues that if Dante is still not satisfied with his explanation, then Beatrice will set his mind straight on the matter. The mentor says that all Dante should care about now are the 5 remaining wounds carved into his forehead, one less than before, removed a moment ago by the striking light of the Angel of Mercy. Before Dante can reply, he finds he has already made his way to the 3rd terrace of Purgatory, the terrace of the Wrathful. That's it, thanks for watching. Come and join us on our Discord server to keep up with the channel, or check out one of our other videos linked right here. I'll see you in the next episode. Toodles!